Welcome to Voices of eLearning with your host, J.W. Marshall
and Lena Marie Saleh,
a podcast that highlights the people who are changing the way we learn and grow.
Each week, we'll speak to the innovative minds who are pushing the boundaries and transforming online education.
We'll explore their stories and discover how they're empowering students around the globe to achieve success.
Join us on this journey and get inspired by the power of online learning.
Hello and welcome everyone to today's episode of the Voices of eLearning. I'm your host, J.W. Marshall with Summit K-12, and with me as always as co-host, Lena Marie Saleh from Canva. Lena, how are you doing today?
I'm great, and I'm really excited to kick off today's interview.
Exactly. So we'll jump right in. With us today, we have Nick Lambert. He is the CEO of Doc, and we are going to be talking about all things micro-credentialing, fraud protection, this future of education. We'll kind of hit a little bit of everything. Nick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, JW. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to speaking more about this topic.
Absolutely. And so we actually like to start every episode out with the same two questions, just for our audience to get to know you. And rather than read a long bio of your accomplishments, we like to ask, who are you, and not what do you do, but who are you and what do you love about what you get to do with Doc?
I'll take the second part. Like, what do I love what I do? I think the main driving force for me is enabling individuals to control and have custody over their own data. And that data could be anything from music, obviously qualifications and credentials, which we'll talk about a lot today. It could even be just kind of files that you have or your ongoing learning at work. But for me, a real driving point is moving the power structure away from corporations and even government. I'm not anti-government, but even moving that away to the individual to enable them to control their own information. That's really a kind of driving force for me and has been for the last probably 10, 11 years.
And of course, educational institutions as well. Before we go into that privacy and protection, just talk to us a little bit about what you've seen as far as the shifting landscape and the growth of micro-credentials, certifications, even pre-pandemic, but certainly through the pandemic through today.
Yeah, it certainly has developed a lot. I think also what we see as drivers are even things like learning management platforms. Like education used to be by itself a very centralized thing, kind of passed down by, really governments in many cases, certainly with a pre-working age, very formalized. And I think like what we're seeing now really with the advent of the internet is like shorter qualifications, like kind of micro-credentialing, that has come to the fore, and really flexible learning. So whether it's on Zoom, we talked before about like, my son having kind of tutoring sessions online, like that's something that pre-pandemic would have been probably unlikely. And a lot of the learning management platforms like Coursera and stuff, of course, have been around for a long time. But I think a lot of these platforms and what the internet has enabled is much shorter, more specific learning opportunities. And I think that's led into like micro-credentialing, like you said, JW. And I think, that those things are starting to be taken a lot more seriously by employers because they're a much better reflection of a person and what they know than just the large qualifications that they've collected over time.
And I know that your company has done a lot of work, obviously, around verifiable credentials and how they're helping educational organizations prevent fraud. So can you talk a little bit about that and, kind of break that down for our audience?
Yes, of course, Lena. Yes, so I think the big thing that we've all been hearing about for years is like degrees that are bought on the internet and kind of diploma farms or diploma mills, they're called. And these are like almost like a multi-billion-dollar industry. And they're unable to prevail because the method that people use to check credentials, well, either they don't check them and they just make the assumption that they're correct, but some pretty figures, like some highest, like 70% of some credentials are faked, leads you to believe that they need to start checking, but companies don't want to because it's expensive and time consuming. So it can take, it can be like $50 to go and just phone up a university and understand if a degree is legitimate. And so that's enabled these diploma mills to kind of flourish into these massive businesses. And I think a lot of the problem is that they are able to do that because no one is doing those checks to make sure that these degrees are valid or not. And so part of the work that credentialing and decentralized identity can provide is effectively making sure that when these, like a student presents themselves as a candidate for a job, the credentials that they present can be verified instantly through kind of like digital fingerprinting, like I mentioned before. And I'd be happy to kind of talk about that in a little bit more detail. But so really fraud prevention is a very major part of what this type of technology can offer.
Yeah, and talk a little bit. So obviously we need employers to do a better job checking, and there's that side of things. But for the students, really the benefit of being able to own that's not, they don't have to go to a registrar's office or an institution to get that. It's instantly accessible for them as well. As talk about the positives of that.
Yeah, so I think that there's not only the delay of time there, JW, of needing to go and make that request, but when you think about it, like, why should they? Like, that's data, that's information about that candidate, that person, that student. In the case of like a degree, it's 3 or 4 years of their life that they've given to that, and they should be able to control that information. It's theirs. And so the notion that they go and have to ask permission to get access to that by someone else, it kind of sucks. So I think there's the kind of moral thought there that they can actually just have access to something that's rightfully theirs, and they can use it however they see fit. I think that's important. And so credentials of this type enable them to share them potentially privately with other organizations in a way that the person verifying that credential, it could be the employer, for example, doesn't even know who the issuer is or doesn't necessarily have any contact with them, and that keeps it private. Because today, if you think about it, if I have a credential, a degree certificate, for example, and I go for a job, if that employer then goes to check that certificate, they go back to the university and say, look, see this guy, Nick, has he done this degree? They know I'm applying for that job and where I'm applying for that job because it's part of the verification process. But how much more private is it if I go to that employer, present a credential that's has this signature built into it where they know it was issued by that university and they don't need to check. So not only is that cool for the employer because they don't have all that cost and overhead, but it's great for me as for my privacy, because why should the university know what I'm going to do next?
Yeah, very true. I think about I taught in the classroom for 10 years, and we always had to, every new employer I had to, give my transcript to, but you have to request it first from the registrar's office. So it takes months and whatever. And finally, when, you pay for each one, and then finally it comes, and then you have to mail it off, and you have to do all this, old school practice of that. So it's just all of your data flying around. So I think it's great that we're finally moving in that direction. And so actually on that note, and before we get into some of the other fun things we want to talk about, I do want to talk about the role and change of digital data in our schools. And so we talked a little bit about this offline before the recording, but love to kind of bring that here for everyone to share just how much our students' data is being owned by, organizations or by the school districts, and how much of it you just don't know is being taken from you, I guess.
Exactly. And not only is it something that's owned, but it's out there to be grabbed. So whenever we do centralized data, and what I mean by that is an entity, a school or a company, they basically hold all their student data or their user data in one place. And what that does is they can kind of like put a moat around it and try and secure it. But the problem is it's really hard to secure data online, extremely hard. So, and if you put it all in one place, it's like a total honeypot for someone to go and get that. So imagine then like an adversary or a hacker gets in and gets all the school data. It's pretty valuable. Like they could sell that in the dark web or anything like that. But if you pull all that data in one place, that makes that attractive. But if you then gave that data to the students or their parents or guardians and decentralized it, the hacker would have to hack each individual student for one record every single time. And that kind of removes the incentive. Like, why would I bother doing that? And so I think the amount of data that's held by schools, it probably would frighten us how much is held about them, probably way too much. But actually, if you start to pass that control of that data or the ownership of that data back to the student or their guardian, then you enhance the security that you can provide. So I think it's important that in the future we start to move to that type of mindset. And I think it's going to take time because people are used to that way of working. You'll have like compliance and legal ramifications that need to be figured out. But I think like this is definitely the future. I think we'll definitely move that way, but it's difficult to know how long it'll take.
Yeah, I think that you make an important point is how much our data is centralized and how much school districts are, owning this data and then they're passing it on to the other ed tech companies and, that sort of thing. And we can only do so much in our control, but decentralizing it can be a really important role. On that note of that, generative AI is obviously becoming quite an important player, and we're, it's recording things that we're doing by, just going to the web and searching, or you're putting your stuff into Chat GPT. So, what are some ways that we can kind of, be thinking about that or helping to kind of, thwart that crisis? I think that's looming ahead.
Yeah. The big concern I've got about AI is more that like it can start to pretend that there's a case recently, I think, and it's I think a grandparent and someone who wasn't super technically savvy, but savvy enough to obviously get online and get onto a kind of Zoom call, and they thought they were speaking to their I think their grandson, and basically the grandson would ask the grandparent for a loan of some money, and some money was, can you send it over to this account? And it turned out the grandchild was actually an AI. And you can start to have this notion where, and we, again, kind of using the example of my son in a tutoring session, it's like, how do I know he's actually on a call with, your actual tutor? And so these are the types of things that become quite worrying, that if AI can almost replicate anything, then that starts to become a concern. But you could actually use things like verifiable credentials, that if I hold this thing, the AI can't hold it. Because it's mine and I've got it in my wallet. But if I use that when I come onto a Zoom call to identify myself, then that's something that the AI can't fake. And so we could start to think about using decentralized identity and verifiable credentials that traditionally we think about for academic achievement and learning, actually as a mechanism to identify yourself on calls. But I'm totally not like an AI hater either. Like I play about with like a personal AI that I think, like, imagine you and I could have this conversation, but I would train my AI enough and all the data is held locally in my machine, that it could appear that you're having a conversation with me and you're getting all my thoughts and opinions. It's just that I'm not on the call, I'm away playing golf or doing something else. And I think AI has some promise there, as well as all the kind of computational stuff, but it's definitely something we should be concerned about.
Yeah, and it's definitely not good or bad on its own. It's how you use it, but also how you protect yourself, against it. So I was going down the AI rabbit hole and seeing how you could record things with, speaking of grandparents, and if you get enough data, they can kind of talk to your kids that they would never meet. It's just really interesting how you can kind of extend someone's life almost, or even famous people from the past, and clearly there's it's not real. There's, a lot of gray area, but it's unavoidable. We are heading in that direction for better or worse. And so the fact that there are, guardrails that can be put into place is really important to talk about now and to think about now.
Yeah, definitely.
And you go.
Edit us out and then go. We'll go.
Go ahead. You can go.
No, I was just going to circle back to the digital fingerprint and dive a little deeper into the technical. Right? We don't want to just scratch the surface here, but I'm assuming there's some blockchain technology involved somewhere along the process here. Can you take us, still in layman's terms, but a little deeper into how does this work?
Of course. So there doesn't have to be a blockchain. Like there can be more features you can add by having one, but there doesn't have to be. But the digital fingerprinting part, the basic premise of it is there's something called a key pair, which is like a public key and a private key. And what you can do is think of the public key like your email address, and then think of the private key like the password you use to access that email. And so when you're asking for someone to send you something, an email, you give them your email address, your public key. And that's something that's obviously, as the name would suggest, is publicly available. And then you can send an email to that, but only the person with the access to that password can actually send an email from that email address. And it's the same principle for credentials. So for example, if Harvard University send me a law degree, I'd be lucky enough to get that. They would effectively sign it with they have their public address that they make known to everyone, and they sign the credential with their private key, something only they know, because it's kind of like their password. So when I then present as a student that degree certificate to a future employer, they're able to check that the public key matches Harvard's, so they know it came from them, even though they don't know what the password is. But only Harvard could have sent that credential because only they have the private key associated with that public key. So hopefully that's that. So that's the basic premise for all of this. And that's basically just cryptography using that JW. And then what you can do with blockchains is you can start to do kind of fancy things like anchoring credentials, which means you can timestamp them in a publicly available place, and some other kind of fancy cryptographic techniques that you can do. But ultimately, that's the kind of core premise. And that's what I'm talking about. The digital fingerprint is basically a signed thing that has a claim on it, like Nick has a degree from Harvard.
Perfect. And that leads me to a follow-up question in the weeds. Imagine a school district or a higher ed, institution, they give that transcript to the students individually. It's decentralized, but they still have a way to control and update, right? That transcript semester to semester. At some point, does it become locked? Obviously, the student can't change the credentials. So I'm guessing that's all baked in.
Well, so what you can do with the credentials, update it. So you can revoke it and reissue it. And that gets you over the hump of that problem, because if you issue something to someone and then still kind of have control over it, it kind of makes that difficult to make and kind of messy, because how can you give something away and then try to update their copy of it? So what you can do with credentials is you can revoke them. So you could issue, and you can revoke for lots of different reasons. One might be that you actually find that Lena was cheating on her exams, for example, and you can decide you want to take that credential off her. But in the case that you're describing, JW, it might just be that actually you want to provide further color to their academic achievement. And if you want that to be all within one credential, you can actually revoke the old one and reissue a new one with all of the new stuff on it. That would be the way that you would manage that problem.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'm thinking you would revoke the 2022 transcript and replace it with the 2023 timestamp, that kind of deal.
Correct. And you can still have the 2022 stuff on there, and you can still say, look, this learning and these qualifications happened at that point in time. And then you can say, and this is now what's incrementally happened since then. And so you could just continue to do that. The other thing you could do is actually just issue a new credential. So you could say, here's your 2022 credential, and here's a 2023 credential on top. And then you basically have a stack of credentials that the student would have. They would want to a further education institution or a future employer.
Perfect. And last question on this topic, you're stacking credentials there. How would a student stack credentials from other places, right? I did my undergraduate at this institution, my graduate school there, and then I took some online courses, self-service, and got credentials. Is there a central hub that a student can own all of that in one place to an employer?
Yeah, and that's the part where interoperability is really the watchword there. So at the moment, a lot of this technology is very, very new, and there are standards in place that enable all the companies that are developing this space and working to these standards certain parameters that they can work within that would enable all of these different types of credentials from these different companies and networks and blockchains to all work interoperably, can't even say that, within one wallet. But that's still something that's a work in progress. So it's very much possible, but it would need the wallet, whoever's making that wallet, or the developer, they would need to make sure it's compatible with the other networks. So the example you gave, the other university, if they were using a different provider, they would just need to make sure that the type of credentials that they use would work within that wallet. The work is very minimal, but interoperability is obviously key for all of this to work, and it's definitely at the very early stages of that. So we're seeing some interoperability, but not at the level that you described just there, JW, but that's certainly the holy grail.
So the idea, I guess, essentially is just that everyone essentially has their own wallet that is just of their identity, which has like their own keys, and everything that you do essentially goes into your wallet, kind of like does your Apple Wallet. And you can just pull them up as you need.
That's exactly right. And identity can be lots of different things. So it can be like we talk a lot about education, as you'd expect on this type of podcast, but it can also be your mobile driver's license that I know is going through kind of legislation within California just now. It could even be things like identifiers, can even be things like accessing a website is also identity. Like, we don't always think of it that way. We think of identity being a passport, a driver's license, a big government thing. But it can actually be just the username and password you use to access a website. That's an identifier as well. And why shouldn't you also control and own that? So your wallet or wallets, but probably better if you just have one, could have all of this stuff in it. It's all backed up. So if you lose it, you can just basically restart it and get all that information back. And all of that technology exists today. But yeah, exactly, Lena, your wallet will have like potentially hundreds of different types of things. And it could even have your credit score, like loan applications that you've made, all of this stuff, and you'd have control of it, and just you would have access to it.
Man, doesn't that sound nice? Just you log in, you can actually find your things rather than being like, where is that? Which website is that?
Exactly. It can replace like a password manager almost as a way to think about it for people that are using those. But we talk about other companies, like the US is a tricky one, but even your own medical records like that. I mean, that's something where it's the most personal stuff that we have. In the UK, where I'm based, we have a kind of national health service, which is extremely centralized, which has some advantages and disadvantages. And I know in the US, it's very fragmented and different, but, these are really personal things. Why should it be centrally stored? Or, I mean, even in the UK, a lot of the time, even a lot of stuff is still paper, which is obscene, like in this day and age, and anyone has access to it. So if I go into a GP and my medical records are just lying on their desk, which doesn't strike me as particularly great. So, but imagine I had those in my wallet and I could then decide I want to give the doctor access to my medical records for an hour, and then that ability to access is revoked. That's where it starts to become really, really interesting and powerful.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine the medical field catching up to that. Would be nice.
Be slow.
Nice. It's slow. It's very slow moving for sure.
There is something working in the UK right now. They do have an NHS Health Pass, which is running, and they had actually something during COVID in the US called IBM Health Pass, where kind of it basically tracked COVID vaccinations for people that wanted to travel. And it told them the types of vaccinations, what company it was, whether it's Pfizer or someone else, as to whether those were the types of vaccinations accepted into the country where they were traveling to. And that was distributed to 150 million credentials went out. So these are kind of things that you don't really hear about too much, but this technology has been like deployed at massive scale, even in the US where you do have a fragmented system.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about students owning their own data, us owning our own data, really moving towards that personal moment. But you guys do also do a lot of partnerships with other companies in which you do help them with like their credentialing, obviously to probably help with that interoperability piece. But are there any, how does that kind of work when you do work with these like edtech type companies like 7 Mile or anybody else that you basically support?
Yeah, 7 Mile are a great company. They're actually a charity based in Australia, and really what they focus on, which is I think something that's lost in education, is they focus on soft skills quite a lot. So we have this kind of Victorian, certainly in the UK, Victorian system of learning that kind of almost really focuses on core skills like kind of all the STEM stuff, but it does leave behind. And what you sometimes find is students that are not as well rounded on like presentation skills or how they should talk to businesses and things like that. And that's what 7 Mile work on. And so they asked us, they've started a new program that they're rolling out. I think this year is about 1,500 schools in New South Wales. And they want the ability for the students that go through these kind of after school training programs. And they then go on to work with businesses and helping them with problems. So one of the kind of downsides of I guess getting older is that you kind of lose your ingenuity and your innovation. You become very like focused in your mindset. But they find that like children of school age have still really good imaginations, very innovative. And so they have a program there where they enable students to work with businesses trying to work on problems that they've not been able to solve. So why not try and bring in somebody that doesn't have all of those burdens of what's possible and what's not, and they can work on this problem. And so 7 Mile use these kind of credentials that they learn after school, and then try and use them to match up students with employers trying to solve these problems. And they're able to take these credentials that the student controls, they hold in their wallets, but the employer can actually verify that that student has been through that learning opportunity. So that's sort of really interesting work that we're doing with 7 Mile. And some of the other work that we start to see is more with learning management platforms, because specifically they are very technology friendly and very like mobile and portable, whereas maybe bricks and mortar universities, like you said yourself, you're still getting paper transcripts sent to you, like and I've still probably got a few lying around, and they're kind of useless because so yeah, I think that's where we see this the kind of adoption of this technology happening more quickly.
Well, that's really exciting, I think, to move forward from just the digital transcript. Did you graduate from this university? Yes, no. What was your GPA? To real digital portfolios that are certified by either an institution or an online source that's credible and accredited. So then it brings that not just knowledge to life, but those skills to life for employers. And I think that's where we're going to see more validation, that it's not just about your GPA, it's not just about what you know, but how can you apply that and what skills you have, and how can we show that off digitally, almost like a graphic designer may build their own website with examples. But now for any industry, for any skills that you're learning, to get those verifiable is really exciting for, I think, the future of education and the future of work.
Yeah, I agree. I was speaking to actually the person in charge of identity at Accenture, kind of very large consulting firm, and they are actually now taking the view that they are starting to issue their own workers with, and I can't remember, they've got hundreds of thousands of employees, Accenture, but even on the projects that they've worked on, because, and not necessarily revealing who they were, but these things that we pick up and the projects that we've worked on, like these are really key in identifying like what experiences we have and what we know and what we don't know. And so they're starting to use those types of credentials to enable them to match up when they have new clients come on stream, to know which of their team is best able to work with that client because they know the experience they've had. So I think we're getting this new concept of learning away from it being even a focused specific thing of you will learn something, actually into an experience that you've gone through a project of work. And that in and of itself is valuable and should be captured in some way. And so I think like micro credentialing and things can really start to do that, where paper certificates just couldn't ever hope to achieve that.
Yeah, and your resume builds in real time. You don't have to look every couple of years or whenever you're looking to change jobs and, what did I do 3 years ago at this company? And kind of along the lines of LinkedIn, where it's kind of verifiable view via public peer review, right? If somebody's lying on there, they will probably get called out on it, but who's really looking at every line item? Did we grow sales 20% or 200%? Having this verified, I think, is the next natural step in kind of the direction we're already headed.
I also think it helps employers, though, because I think just thinking, at the organization that I work at, there's, even if there's 3,000 or 10 people working at an organization, the only person that's going to know directly what you're doing project wise is your manager who's managing this team of people, but nobody at the top or knows, or there, somebody in another organization that doesn't necessarily work with you. And same in the school districts, right? They only know within that brick and mortar walls. Yeah. But what if these 3 students were really excelling at this one thing? You could use that sort of to actually help leverage the classroom and actually change the learning experience for your students. So I think there's lots of potential and opportunities with, moving through this credentialing model.
Yeah, very much so. And it also makes like data really portable as well. So like data is extremely siloed today, and we're trying to do lots of things to break it out of it. But I think it's like human nature that we try and like close things in and protect it and put like moats around it and stuff. But actually, we're much stronger if this data is shared. So an example you gave, Leon, exactly, like if you have students that are excelling in an area, but no one knows about it, maybe it's just their tutor, or even in a work environment where it's just their manager, like a small team. If they could get a credential that's signed by the manager that says they know all this stuff, and then they can carry it about and send it to people that's instantly verifiable, then that data becomes, and that knowledge becomes highly portable and shareable. So yeah, definitely a good point.
Yeah.
All
well,
right.
exciting.
I think we can keep going for a while here, but we try to respect our audience's time and keep within a time frame. Last question: if people want to learn more about you, about Doc, where can they find more information, and who really should be talking to you right now about building this future?
Yeah, so I wouldn't learn more about me because that's going to be quite boring. But for more about Doc, I would go to doc.io, which is our kind of main site. And from there, you can go to, we have a free trial of our technology at search.doc.io. And like anyone can just sign up and play about with it. So it's a great way. There's a no-code solution there that people can use just to, you don't need to be a developer to use this type of technology. So you can go there and create a decentralized identifier and start issuing credentials just to get a flavor of what it's like. So those would be the places I'd recommend.
Perfect. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Lena, of course, thank you for always being here to co-host. And to our audience, thank you for spending your time with us on another episode of Voices of eLearning. Be sure to check out our website or wherever you consume your podcasts for past episodes and for future episodes. And remember to always keep learning.
Bye, everybody.